Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Thank you for coming to the next in our postdoc series titled Think Like a Scientist, Teaching Your Students How to Organize Scientific Concepts. So our presenter today is Dr. Jason Tan, who received his Ph.D. from the Mayo Clinic. He has an interest in both research and teaching, so he applied for and received an ARACTA fellowship here at VCU, where he's doing research in Dr. Gail Christie's lab with make sure I get this right, viral-mediated gene transfer, as well as teaching next semester at Virginia Union University. So today he's going to be presenting an assessment technique called card sorting, which allows educators a fast yet innovative way to measure how their students are structuring the knowledge that they gain. So, Dr. King,
Okay.
start.
Okay. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks everyone for coming. So, I make reference in your handouts to a lot of the references that like the actual papers that I talk about in this presentation. So, if you want to take notes on that second page. And then also, if you guys have any questions, this is supposed to be teaching about active learning. So feel free to interrupt me if you have objections. If something I say offends you, that's fine. Feel free to interrupt me. So, okay, let's start. I actually changed the title just a little bit. Think like an expert scientist. Last year I visited a fifth grade classroom just to talk about research, and I would say if you want to think like a scientist, go to a fifth grade classroom because they're super curious, super excited about scientists. But if you want to think like an expert scientist, what they sort of lack and what your students lack, I would say, is that the ability to structure the knowledge in a meaningful way, in particular to solve problems, right? Which is what we do in research. So think like an expert scientist. And this is a picture of a light bulb. So one of the first things I'm going to ask you to do is just sort of think of like a light bulb moment that you've had, especially like in your early training years that sort of jettisoned you on the trajectory of research. And to sort of break down what made that light bulb moment possible, what were the components, and how can you encourage that as a teacher, right? So if we take a closer look at the filament on a light bulb, it has a beautiful structure, and as an expert, this is what you have, and that's what allows you to do research. So we're all blessed with expertise, but it's also a curse, because what we do now, we largely do intuitively. And this is a challenge because it's hard to make explicit, to know what to make explicit to our students such that they're structuring their knowledge. So that's sort of the goal of this card sorting activity, is to make it explicit. Oh, okay. So to begin with, I can actually remember the exact point in time that this happened for me in my undergraduate years. I was watching this video. So I thought I'd show this to you. And as you're watching it, think of, okay, there's a lot of content. What is the uniting concept? And so I've edited a little bit to convey the feelings I was feeling, I guess. So I'll just show this to you now. key question, again, is how are you facilitating the structure of knowledge? Hope we don't want to watch that. So,
I'm gonna have to close out.
sorry. Okay, so I guess the point there is when I was watching that video as an undergraduate, in that course it wasn't actually clear to me what I was interested in. I knew it was like super interesting, but I lacked that conceptual framework, one of them being structure is function, right? But I got that sort of conceptual, the opportunity to organize it conceptually in some of my other courses that I took. And I would argue that that's what enabled me to sort of become a self-catalyst and to begin organizing my knowledge in a way that was useful. And so what we encounter, I think, in a lot of our lectures is it sounds really good to us, but it sounds sort of like an alien signal where they don't understand what we're doing behind the scenes, right? So if you've ever seen this movie Contact, they get this signal, right? And there's this really interesting function that's going to be following from it, but this is really the part that we have to focus on. But as experts, we spend like a nanosecond right here sometimes. And it's here that the students, I think, need help. So the dream is to promote expert-like thinking and reasoning skills in students as they progress throughout, college and even graduate school. So an interesting thing from the two papers that I'm presenting on about card sorting is that I think there's evidence to suggest this is even meaningful in a graduate school setting, or like medical school, for example. And the purpose of this is that they will be able to integrate concepts across levels of organization and complexity to connect these conceptual domains. The problem is that many assessments that are used they're just testing factual recall or sort of low-level cognitive skills to come up with correct answers. So how can we design in the assessments themselves a way to get at this complex behavior, right? A solution is, one of them is a classroom assessment technique that we're going to cover today, that's using active learning to help them structure their knowledge. So I think most of us probably have an idea of what active learning is, but just to make it clear, it's something where you engage the students in a process of learning through activities and discussion in class as opposed to passive listening. And it focuses on higher order thinking, which is what structuring of knowledge is. And there's a lot of evidence. I've picked two of my favorite papers that show that active learning really does make a difference, in particular for student retention. So we're going to get to the first card sorting test real quick here, but again, so structuring of stuff, I think, as a protein biochemist, of structuring of proteins, right, where you can think of sort of just the content, which we spend a lot of time on, is just right here. But really the more fascinating part is all this other folding, how it's being connected to form this thing that has structure. So this is sort of the sort of primary, secondary, and three area is sort of, it's beginning to fold in on itself, but it's sort of within a discipline. And then you can have interdisciplinary, where distinct units sort of interact with one another. And you can think of this like seeing the connections, for example, in an undergraduate biology major between sort of these sub-disciplines within biology. So card sorting sort of covers, it can do all of these things in terms of the folding of the knowledge or the folding of the knowledge. Today, the card sorting tasks that we're focused on are actually the largest scale thing. You can adapt them to do very specific things, but I focused on this in part because I have an interest in undergraduate biology education, but like I said before, it can be applied to other things. And at the end of this talk, I'm going to stop talking and maybe we can brainstorm some ideas, because I'm really curious to see what sorts of card decks you could build. Okay. Card sorting, what does it do? Basically, what I hope you get out of this, you may not actually end up doing card sorting itself, but I hope you get a feeling for just the act of having a dialogue about this is useful, right? Sort of to get over that curse of expertise. So card sorting what it does is, the first step is it helps us make the structure explicit to ourselves, and then helps us explain it to the students. A key thing is that we have to explain to them explicitly, this is why you are doing this. Otherwise, they may be resistant to it. And a second thing, though, it's bidirectional. We get information on how they are structuring their knowledge, which is hard to do unless you sit down with them and talk to them one-on-one. But in a large classroom, you need something where you can do it in an efficient way and get a sort of snapshot of everyone. It also teaches them how to apply metacognitive skills, right? So it's hard for us to see it because we're experts, but they actually don't maybe know how to do some of these things, think about how they're thinking. There's components of peer teaching and group work. And then ideally what you would like to do is have sort of a group of faculty do this together, which is challenging for various reasons. Okay, so I want to get to the first actual card sorting activity. The one thing I'll say is that what makes this interesting is you get quantitative data, which is, their card sorting has been around for a while, but what it's been lacking is getting numbers out of it. Okay, so without further ado, so there's two card sorting tasks basically. The first is one where you're sort of the novice, although I generally find there's always one or two experts even for superheroes. So I just wanted to do this just to give you a feel for how this is working. So you can work in groups. There should be enough cards if you really want to work alone, you can. But so get together in groups, and here's the task. Sort them into categories. You get to make up whichever category you'd like based on your fundamental knowledge of superheroes. There is no wrong or right way to do this. Okay? So each card must belong to only one group. So you can't have Storm be in two groups. She has to be in her own. And yeah, so I think you get it. So go ahead. I'll give you like 3 or 4 minutes. So I'm just curious, what are your general impressions, or let's start, so what were some of the ways you were sorted? Anyone want to?
Marvel and DC.
Marvel and DC. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
Those that I know from the 1960s.
Oh,
And
okay.
that's it.
Were you guys using your smartphones for this?
Nope.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
At one point.
I was just
Yeah.
curious.
I did.
Okay, so I've never heard of that one. Okay. Any others?
We did 3 groups. We
Yeah.
had whether or not they actually had any superpowers, or it was based on technology, and then whether they could fly or not.
Okay.
Really just didn't want
Okay.
to.
Right. That could be. Okay. So interesting. So now the question is, so the authors of this paper, they did this with novices and experts. So this is how some people sorted, which is kind of what you were, I think you said, flying.
Flying, yeah.
Yeah. So robot type, flying, or animal, right? So in terms of expertise, right? Oh, sorry. And then here's another way.
Oh, he's X-Men.
So which do you think was novice and which do you think is expert?
Novice robot type flying.
Expert.
Right.
That's the
Yeah.
So the novice, so you're right. If you think about it if you were getting a degree, a Ph.D. in superheroes, right? This would not be really a deep way of organizing your knowledge, whereas this would. Another interesting thing that comes out from this card sorting task. Okay, wait, sorry. So the point here is how you're structuring that is representative. It's an explicit connection to how you're structuring your knowledge, right? There's an interesting thing that also arises out of this, which is that you can get unpredicted ways of sorting, right? So someone, Amy, I believe, your group sorted actually in the way that even a better expert sorted is DC and Marvel, right? And what I mean by better is, I guess that it's more fundamental, right? It's even less categories, and it describes an even more expert-like opinion. You can also get interesting things like, I knew these from the 60s, for example. right? But that's, even though it's not necessarily how an expert sorts, that's useful to me as a teacher to know, oh, okay, they were sorting it like that. Maybe there's some work, maybe there's some interesting things there that I can, maybe there's a history of superheroes that is also indicative of a different type of expertise, right? So that's fun. Okay, so if we were to do this in a class, what you could do next, this is getting at sort of the metacognitive skills, is assign some sort of discussion, like say on Blackboard, right, where you ask them to provide their rationale for sorting. They explain which of them was the hardest to sort and why, and they get to see each other's responses too, right? So they're interacting with their peers. And then you can ask them explicitly, what do you think of how this person sorted? What was good about it? What did you like? What didn't you like? And then to revise how they are sorting their cards, okay? So there's some papers I've included that, this one in particular, this reference 17, is a really nice paper just talking about metacognitive skills. But the point is that card sorting is doing a lot of different things at once. There's utility in a lot of different ways. So the idea here is that, okay, what makes a good assessment tool? It doesn't just differentiate between correct and incorrect, which is how a lot of tests are performed, in part because we don't have time, right? But by doing this, maybe we still do have time because we're getting a fairly simple data set from how you sorted. And as I'll show you in a bit, there's ways to plug it and chug it and get a nice graph, right? Okay. So, so this is a classroom assessment technique. There's a book that's full of these. And it's really nice because it breaks it down by the amount of time and energy that they estimate it takes for you to do things like prepare it, to get the responses and then to analyze the data. And so what you just did is part of a larger set of classroom assessment techniques that are focused on problem-solving skills. The one we just did is problem recognition tasks, where it's not about answering the question, it's about taking a step back and saying, what is the question about, right? And then if you look at this book, they have various other ones, and some of them, such as this one, require a lot more energy and time. It's basically a full-out research thing where you're sitting down with everyone, recording what they're saying to you, right? In some ways, this is the best way to do it, but we don't necessarily have time to do that. But the point is they're all integrated, and I really like this book, and I encourage you to maybe check it out. So here are some of the skills that are involved in all of these classroom assessment techniques. So it requires mastery of knowledge, the ability to recognize types of problems, look beyond the surface features and perceive underlying similarities amongst problems, which is what we just did. What this doesn't do, a limitation of this is just because they know what type of problem it is, it doesn't mean that they will know how to solve it, right? So that's where you would have to have another sort of activity where they're determining the principles and techniques needed to solve them, and then as we've harped on a little bit, metacognition, knowing how they are working through the problems. So in red is sort of the stuff that we've been doing with card sorting. The pros, so this is, a lot of this is taken from this book in chapter 11, so maybe I don't need to, and maybe I can get your feedback on this maybe at the very end. But there's pros and cons to every classroom assessment technique. Some of the cons are that real-life problems are complex, so and they may not fit easily into one category, but that's where some of the outside of class homework can allow them to explore that a little bit better. Okay. Are there any questions or general? Okay, so you were novices in the first card sorting task. Now you understand why it's important, right? So I'm sort of trying to close the loop. You are students in some ways of me right now. I'm trying to explain to you why you did it before you actually do it. You buy into it a little bit, make it a little fun first. So now take your biology card sorting deck and do the same thing. This one might take a little more time, so I might give you 5 or 6 minutes. And you're organizing them based on your fundamental knowledge of biology. No right or wrong way, although Now you know there is kind of a right.
I write my like
I spent 4 years
optimal.
doing
Sorry, wrong.
I was just saying here, don't be
That's fine. Here you go. Okay.
took me
Oh.
Just in case you're mom.
here.
Change also.
Yeah,
I
right.
know we could all sit here and probably do this for like an hour. That's one of the points, is to always allow more time than you think is necessary for these things to happen. But what were some of the ways that you sorted? I'd like to hear sort of as many as.
We used Bloom taxonomy. The
Oh.
Bloom taxonomy on the types of questions that it was asking.
Okay.
So whether or not it was basic knowledge, comprehension, or analysis application, or the higher level thinking.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay. So not necessarily biology expertise, but actually pedagogy.
Yep.
Interesting.
I know.
Yeah.
We did a really similar thing, but we just split them into conceptual
Uh-huh.
questions versus more like basic knowledge questions, so
Okay.
just into 2 groups.
Okay.
And then within those groups, divided them by like topic.
Yeah, I'd be interested to compare
Yeah.
your 2 cart sorts. So how you do this task, how you explain it is important. Maybe, I mean, I'm happy you guys did that, but we were testing this. But that's still good.
So we didn't do it that way at all. So we
Okay.
have like, metabolism, genetics, developmental biology,
Metabolism, genetics, developmental biology, okay.
population genetics,
Population genetics.
or like evolution. I'm sorry.
Evolution, okay.
Yeah.
That's what we did.
Yeah. Almost
We
exactly.
had
right.
classical genetics, population genetics, structure, and metabolism.
Okay. Structure and metabolism. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you say classical genetics?
Sort of classical genetics as opposed to population genetics.
Ah,
Those are
classical
2
versus-
separate categories.
Classical versus population genetics. Okay. Any other people want to share?
Apparently not.
Okay. How about the person on the offside? Did you have any additional ways of sorting? Just wanted to give you a chance. Okay. So.
I think he was muted, but
she'll let
us know.
Yeah. So two quick things. I know you want to know what's the expert way of sorting that at least these people are saying is expert. So it's really interesting to me, and maybe to you too. Like, I wish I could put a tape recorder on each of your desks and listen to what you're saying, right? Imagine that you could do that, go home at night and see what they're thinking. Like, there's so much data there, right? It would take months and months to sort of break down how people are thinking about this, and you can do that. Yeah, I forgot what the second thing was. Okay, so what we're finding is, this is what is called an unframed cart sort. I did not tell you the deep features that I wanted you to sort by, right? And sort of what happens, it's good and it's bad. It's good because you get to see what they're thinking, but it's bad in the sense, not bad, it's unwieldy, the results that you get. It's all over the place, right? So the second thing you can do is do a framed cart sort task, where you say, okay, now I'm going to give you these deep threshold concepts. Can you sort, right? Because all of you are basic. All of you are experts. The second critical question is, once you're primed with where I want you to go, can you sort like an expert? So bigger picture, I'll show you the correct answers in a second, but the bigger picture is, so to what extent do student populations at different levels of biology education organize their biology knowledge differently? So you could see something like this being implemented by multiple faculty. You walk in as a freshman, you leave as a senior. You walk in undergrad, you walk in as a graduate student, you leave as, right? And all the way up to faculty. And you can see, as a result of them paying however much they paid to get this education, did they actually structure their knowledge differently, right? If they didn't, what was the point of their education? I don't know. So maybe they got into a great program. And then the second thing that I've talked about is, what are the unhypothesized frameworks? Because I'm getting information now from that. So, okay, what are the deep concepts that experts use? This can vary. You may challenge sort of how this has been sorted, but this was based on a consortium. The paper published in 2010, it's reference to, and they got together and asked this question: how do we want? Well, they asked it. So, what are the key concepts and competencies that we want them to walk away with, right? So here were the hypothesized deep features that they used for this particular card sort task. Okay, evolution, people mentioned. Pathways and transformation of energy and matter, I heard some people say things like this. Information flow, exchange and storage, and structure and function and systems, right? It's not to say that how you sorted wasn't right? But these, well, what do you, I mean, I think you can see what's great about these is it unites disciplines. Bioinformatics, molecular biology, immunology, right? It's sort of, these are the deep concepts that connect everything together, okay? So, here's an example of how they took samples, from going from undergraduate, they actually compared non-biology to entering biology, and you can see, so that's the other thing. To help make it not unwieldy results, they were very specific in how they chose these cards. So where did they get these cards? They got them from textbook questions, but this is not just a fishing expedition, it's hypothesis-driven. Being hypothesis-driven is important to our research, right? It's also important for stuff like this. So they were explicit. They picked cards that had a deep feature, and they were explicit in trying to skew it towards a surface feature. The surface feature that none of us sorted, that I know of, is novices, was they were breaking it down by like, these are bug or insects, microorganisms, and plants. And you can see this is happening for both the non-biology and biology majors when they walk into college. You can see there's a slight change now. Can you see any sort of, so they're identifying some of these deep concepts that are laid out, but also what they're doing is starting to organize it by class, right? So that's an unframed, that was an unpredicted way of sorting. And if you think about it, right, I'm a high school student, I just took biology, and now I'm in college, it makes sense that now they're sorting it based on all these classes that they're taking. And there's utility in that, right? There's utility in having that general framework. But if they're also leaving college like that, just being able to organize it, oh, it's this class I took, is that really what we want? I would say no. So maybe you could develop another card sort task where instead of the surface features, these things, you are actually using a surface feature of classes instead of like, and you see what I'm saying? So you can start to get at that, to sort of break that. I think in the paper it says, maybe we should name our classes differently. Instead of maybe having a class, cell biology, biochemistry, maybe structure function, like what would that sort of class look like? What if you sort of flipped it and how you were teaching curriculum? Well, that might take a long time to get through. So how do we turn this into numbers? And this is what I'll spend the last 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and then 5 minutes on this. I might go a little fast, and then 5 minutes just to bring it back home and see what you guys want to talk about. For the unframed task, there's one step you need to go through in addition to get numbers, right? You need a rubric for saying what category did they sort to your deep feature. So you can have a rubric like this where you say, if they say any of these terms, then it counts as a deep feature. If they say these terms, it doesn't count. And the reason why it doesn't count in this case is because those words are actually stated in the cards, right? So it doesn't make sense. All you did is you repeated what was said in the cards. I hope what you're getting a feel for here is that even though it's sort of a simple task, you have to put work in up front because there's these sort of weird variables. Even the language that you use in the cards can affect, right? Maybe they just don't understand a term. So you want to avoid that as much as possible, right? So the wording of your question is critical. It can prime your participants to think in one way or another. You want it to be unbiased. So in the first card sort that they did, for example, right, so white is not sorting into the deep feature, black is. And you have your non-biology majors versus faculty. And you can see for these 3 deep concepts, faculty were doing pretty good, but even for this one, which makes me sad, they didn't do quite as good for structure and function. Why do you think that was, given this particular card sort? Is there any reason in particular? I don't think that it was that those faculty didn't know the importance of structure and function.
There was like a mixture in some of the
A
cards.
mixture?
I mean, like some of the cards, it kind of addresses more than one of those groups, right? And so
Yeah.
you would see that could
Right.
get pulled into one of those other categories.
Okay.
And so
So
at
maybe
some point, maybe you
there's some
decide to
ambiguity.
eliminate one,
Mhm.
or
That's a good point. I can think of another good point, which is that when I think of structure function, I think like RNA polymerase, right? Things like macromolecules. And because of the surface feature that they picked, which was organisms, you can't necessarily do that as much, right? So again, picking what your categories are is important. And I'm trying to go through this because I know that you probably have courses where you may want to do something like this too. And it's just going to require some thought up front. And what you basically have to do is you have to go out and do a sample trial on a sample of novices and just make sure that you have an idea of what's going on. Okay. So then you get really pretty graphs like this. So there's this value, there's different ways to look at the data. One is called percent card pairs, and I'll explain that in a second. But basically it's just a measure of how much they were sorting into the deep pairs. So what you can see is as you get more and more expertise, sorting into the deep pairs goes up. The surface pairs are going down, especially when you are a graduate student. Sorry, I should have rehearsed that part a little bit better. You can look at the papers and interpret this data. But basically now you can do something. You can compare the unframed and framed. And I've already explained to you the difference between these tasks. So I'm not going to do this for the sake of time, but now the question is, now that you know the deep threshold, the deep features, how would you sort differently? My guess is that since you're all experts, you're going to get almost everything correct, right? But the question is, are your students going to do that? And there are interesting differences in terms of level of where they are in their training. So this is comparing the framed and unframed, which is the difference between those. So if you're at the line, it means there was no change between what you came up in unframed and framed, right? If there's more, that means you got better once you were shown the framed, and less is worse. So you can see here for going all the way up to advanced, seniors in college, they are initially sorting in a way that's the surface. But once you show them the card, they get rid of that. So there's a loss of these frames. But the interesting thing is where those cards are going. So in the case of like freshmen and sophomores, they were still able to sort, like even as a freshman, once you tell them that, they are still sorting here into the deep features, but there's a lot of unexpected pairing going on. So they weren't actually able to make a perfect expert sort. But something happens by the time they are leaving, which is that these unexpected bases unexpected pairs are going down, and this is going up. And then by the time you're in graduate school, you're already sorting like an expert. So what category or categories do unexpected pairs belong to? This is where like the outside of class homework will be helpful. So you get to see how they were sorting and why. And as I said before, what came out here was that a lot of them there was this unpredicted sorting method that was based on their curricular, their classes. So So if you wanted to make a deck of your own, for example, what you would want to do is have, maybe 16 cards, some number of cards, but each card has to have both a deep and surface feature. So that's sort of the tricky part. If you want to do this in a way where you're getting quantitative data, which I would say would be useful, maybe in some type of formative or summative assessment. For example, let's say, I'm just going to run real quick through showing you how you get a number. So let's say that one group had this belonging. One group had this particular group of cards, CDK. So you can see that there are different pair types. DK is based on the surface feature. KC is based on the deep feature. And then there's one last pair that you can make from this, which is an unpredicted, right? And so then you go, basically, you can do some math. So given this 4x4 card deck, you have 24 hypothesized surface features. So for each surface feature, you can go like KD, KJ, KI, DJ, DI, and then JI. And then you multiply that by 4 surface features. Same thing for the hypothesized features. Right. And then if you really want to do this quickly, it's a combination. So 4 choose 2. Right? So a total of 48 predicted pairs from this deck. The number of total pairs is 120. So you have 16 cards, you choose 2. You subtract out the 48 predicted pairs, and you have a total of 72 unpredicted pairs. But then how you did this is some groups would put just one card in one group. So you have to add in 16 possibilities of just individual cards. This is a lot, I know, but I wanted to give it a little bit of teeth. I didn't want to just be like, oh, card sorting is great. I wanted to, and you can go back and look at this in the paper for yourself. But anyways, so you get a total number of 136 possibilities, right? And then all you do is you tally up each of these, right? So this would be like, okay, this pair had 1 surface, 1 deep, and 1 not predicted. And you go through all of their groups and do this. Tally all of them up. So like, let's say they had, 4 surface amongst their whole deck. Then you would divide that by 136. Or no. Yes. I think. Anyways, I think you get the point. You tally all of them up. Yes, you do divide by the total number. You get some percentage. You repeat for everyone, and you can get a class average, or you can look at individuals. And then you get pretty graphs. So one more tool that you can do is edit distance. And this just means it's a slightly different measure, which is the number of cards they would need to do to get a perfect expert sort. And they tell slightly different things about how they're structuring their knowledge that I won't get into. I think that I should have done a better job of practicing this, but I think it's interesting, right? Because you get data out of this, and you can you're getting glimpses of how they structure their knowledge in a quantitative way, which I think is really valuable. The authors of this paper have the scripts or the programs where you just plug it in and you get your numbers. You just have to contact them. Okay, so key takeaways: hypothesis-driven. It's quantitative. The challenge is you need to pick meaningful deep features. So you need to talk amongst yourselves, amongst your experts, to come to some consensus over what the deep features are. And you have to pair it, you have to correspond it with a clever surface category that you may need to go to the novices to see how they're, right? That's hard for us to do, because why would you sort it like that? Okay. So I have maybe like 5 or so minutes left. So this was addressing like the largest global structure of their knowledge. But there are sort of additional ways I'm sure that you're thinking of how you would want to use the card sorting task. So in the classroom assessment technique handbook, they do outline a few of these. do any of you, for example, work with like medical students? Or is it mostly graduate students? Like what types of students do you teach?
Undergrad.
You teach undergraduate? Okay.
Graduate.
Graduate? Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess I was thinking, basically you can have mini case studies, like there's a clinical aspect of this, and maybe you have like an undergrad, a lot of students are interested in medical school,
Yeah, a lot of them.
right? So this is gonna be maybe useful in that, like basically instead of questions from a textbook, you can be like patient A, B, you know, and include in that either biology concepts or more specific deep features that aren't necessarily big picture but small picture. Do any of you, I kind of just made this up, so do any of you guys have ideas? Like, for example, I'm taking a bioinformatics course right now, right, that Amy Olex helps teach. And it's just interesting to me, like I have my own set of expertise and the lectures are great, but I struggle. It's like, what are the deep, like I want to know, how does a bioinformaticist structure their knowledge? Is it different? Like, so I'd be curious, like you have to establish what are your deep concepts that want to come through. You've said a couple of times like this idea of a pipeline, an informational pipeline maybe. So maybe like parts of that pipeline, I don't know.
You've got my wheels turning.
What's that?
I said you've got my wheels turning.
Okay, good, yeah.
Not quite sure how to answer your question yet, but you've got my wheels turning.
Cool, yeah.
Good material.
Okay.
Thank you.
And if any of you have ideas, please email me. Maybe we could even get together because I could be your novice, you know, in that regard. So I think it's getting about time to wrap this up. This is, from my perspective, showing you the utility of active learning. Because every time I start talking too much, I'm like, oh boy, there goes their attention. But,
That's me too.
yeah, so ideas for you. So there's an interesting, it's a blog actually, but this person, you can read their experience in trying to make their own cards. It's reference 9. And he goes through some of the nitty-gritty things that like, oh, I didn't think about this, that affected the success of implementing a card sorting task in his course. You can just Google card sorting and tasks, right? Like they have lots of chemistry and physics. Physics is actually where this started. There was a physics card sort back in the 80s or something that's referenced like 1,000 times. But I'm saying that there's a good chance that you can find a good starting point just by Googling it. Again, do some trial runs with your students and peers. The hardest part about this CAT is it takes some time up front. But once you get it figured out, you get lots of useful information. Another question I had is, so in the unframed, if I gave you multiple, because you guys had all sorts of different ways of organizing it, right? How many different ways could you sort it? My guess is that one of those is going to be the deep features that I was looking for. The challenge there is turning it into data. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When do you do this? Do you do this at the beginning of a class to assess what their abilities are, or do you do it as you're teaching them to see if they're getting the concepts?
Good question. I would say, I mean, you can do both. That's a decision you have to come with an answer to. I think it's more as you go along, right? So I've been presenting this mostly as an assessment tool, but basically it's also a teaching tool. You don't have to get numbers out of it. But I would say, right, like how does this affect how you would construct your lectures? Would you have a slide in the beginning of your lecture that lays out, these are the deep features, and this is how all the specific content goes into it? And then actually do a card sorting task, maybe every 3 weeks, right, till the end of it. I'd say if you start, like at the beginning of the class, I would say start with something like this, like to show them just the concept. Again, buy-in for students is the biggest issue, I think. You just throw this at them and be like, what is going on? Like, why are you having us do this? So I would say not starting with the actual content-based card deck, but something like this would be a good starting point in your class. Okay. As they're doing this, right, they're learning about each things in your class. Ask them to come up with their own card decks. Use their power to help you make future card decks. It's useful for them too, because in the act of making your own card deck, it's going to just crystallize in their brains even more, in addition to giving you ideas of how to make this more useful in the future. We have, we're done. In defense of, I would say maybe look at this classroom assessment technique book if you're interested. I presented one specific classroom assessment technique. They have this cool little inventory at the beginning where it helps you establish what are my teaching goals, like what pedagogically do I want to do, and it adds it up and it says, okay, it seems like you're interested in this particular skill set, and it'll point you to those classroom assessment techniques. That's a little off topic, but it's not related to card sorting. I think I'll end on this one, okay? Which is that if any classroom assessment technique doesn't appeal to your intuition, don't do it. It shouldn't be a burden. And I think the value of something like this is that it adds value to the course, and it makes it much more meaningful to the student. Don't ask the students to do something you haven't tried yourself. You've tried this yourself, so you understand sort of what's going on in their brain. Allow more time, and then the biggest thing, I think, is close the loop. Explain to them why they are doing this. There's a reference, number 11. A big concern I hear is, how do I have time to do all of this? I'm supposed to cover the course content. And this is sort of a different topic. It could be a talk in and of itself. But this is a really good reference that breaks down how you can spend X amount of time. Basically, you have to shift some of the lower level Bloom stuff outside of class, but in a structured way. And so you can do stuff like this. So let's end this. Oh, sorry. This is useful to you. So having someone, I think if you have like a active learning mentor to help you implement this, it's really helpful. So I'll just mention this Palm. So the Genetics Society, GSA, Genetics Society of America, they actually have this Palm network promoting active learning, mentoring, where they actually give you money, right? $2,000 for you to travel between you and some institute where you identify. You have to have a relationship with someone who's good at active learning already, okay? So they give you $2,000 to do that. They give you $1,000, I don't know why, and then they give you, $1,000 for travel to a conference. The idea is that you actually make a publication out of what you're doing. That's this. That's that. Any questions? Please feel free to email me.